Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, Stephen Moore identifies key performance indicators that drive a high 6-week calving rate on farms and the practices farmers can implement now to make sure that cows are fit for breeding.
So we know that we're targeting to have a 6-week calving rate of 90% in the spring. And the objective of this is so that we can have a compact calving period and long lactations to maximize milk production from grazed grass. In terms of during the breeding season, obviously we need very high fertility targets to achieve this compact calving. And the two main KPIs would be the 3-week submission rate, which we're targeting for 90%. And then the other factor contributing to that then is the conception rate to first service. And typically we're looking at, for lactating cows, about 50 to 60% conception rate to first service.
And then depending on mating start date, right now we're anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks out from, the breeding season on farms. I suppose from your perspective, Stephen, can you give us an idea of some important practices that farmers can implement right now and over the coming weeks to make sure that, cows are ready for breeding and to hit that 3-week submission rate of 90% and that there's a good conception rate on those services?
Yeah, Emma-Louise. So I guess, in terms of achieving high submission rates, one of the biggest helps to achieving that, first of all, is having a high 6-week calving rate, because we know that the longer that cows have calved, the higher their fertility performance is going to be. So, within every herd, there are going to be some problem cows that need to be identified. So these are typically cows that are not cycling. And so if they're not cycling, they're not going to be submitted during the breeding season. And the other group of cows then are cows that have a uterine disease, such as metritis or endometritis. And cows with a uterine disease have poorer conception rates. So in terms of identifying cows that are non-cycling, the recommendation would be, we're 3.5 to 4 weeks out from breeding now, is to apply tail paint and monitor heats over the next few weeks. And then after three weeks, you should have identified all of the cows that are not cycling leading up to the breeding season. So the options for those cows then are to, if they are 30 days calved, to put them on a synchronization protocol. So for timed AI, which will begin approximately 10 days before mating start date. And with these types of protocols, because they're timed AI, we can ensure that all of the cows that go on these protocols are submitted for AI by mating start date. In terms of cows that may be dirty, what I mean by that is having a uterine disease from carrying over from calving. We're talking about metri-checking them being the best option over the next couple of weeks to identify these cows. From work that we have done in recent years, when we metri-check cows, anywhere from about 30 days before 30 days before mating start date, we're looking at about 20% of the herd having some level of uterine infection. The option for these cows then would be an intrauterine antibiotic. Cows that do receive an intrauterine antibiotic will have improved conception rates.
Looking to the options that you've mentioned, Stephen, there are some people that are resistant to that pre-breeding tail painting, say that 3.5, 4 weeks out, in that they say it's quite labour intensive. Like, what's your recommendation there? You tail paint the cows that are calved and you're keeping an eye on tail paint. Like, how regularly would you take note of cows that are in heat? Or are you just looking at cows that still have tail paint leading up to the breeding season?
Yeah, for sure, Emma-Louise, it is a bit of extra work before the breeding season has ever started. But I think that if once the tail paint is applied, it would be recommended to check them at once a week. And they don't need to be checked every day for sure, but once a week will be enough to identify when the tail paint has been removed from the cows that are cycling.
And looking then to the metri-checking, for that, are you looking at the whole herd, or are you just looking at cows that you suspect to have some sort of a uterine disease?
Yeah, I mean, it really, I guess it depends on the farm, but we do know that cows that have had a difficult calving, that have had milk fever, ketosis, those are the cows that are most likely to have a uterine infection before breeding. But there will still be another group of cows that you may not have suspected of having an issue, but they would there are going to be some cows that would still have uterine infection.
And then looking to the practice of scanning, and there are some farmers who in the week leading up to breeding will scan their whole herd. Is that something that you would recommend? And I guess a comment on, does that replace things like the heat detection using the tail paint and checking in once a week on that, or the metri-check procedure?
No, certainly. I think that a pre-breeding ultrasound is a very good alternative to doing the pre-breeding heat checks or or metri-checking. Certainly, I would think that one option is for the use of the tail painting and the metri-checking to identify those problem cows that then can be examined by the vet that would need treatment.
So like a combination of all three can be quite useful on farms where you're keeping good records. Looking then to, I suppose, something we talk about every year, Stephen, and it's this idea of low body condition score cows. And there are a few in every herd. I guess, can you explain why we're seeing low condition score cows right now on farms and how we could remedy that leading into the breeding season?
Yeah, well, Emma-Louise, cows do lose body condition score after calving to support the energy requirements for milk production. And there will be a proportion of the herd that will be at a body condition score less than 2.5 leading up to the breeding season. And these are what we would be the cows that we would deem to have a low body condition score of 2.5 or less. However, leading up to breeding, the ideal body condition score target for these animals is 3 to 3.25, and with a herd average of about 2.9 at mating start date. So some of the options for improving body condition score in cows that are thin is once a day milking before breeding begins. I do think with once a day milking that it takes time to work to improve body condition score in cows, and so we're talking about ideally putting cows that are thin on once a day milking, really during early spring, and at the very latest now will be the time that they will be going on once a day milking, because as I said, it will take time for them to increase their body condition score by breeding.
And I suppose it would be useful then from that perspective to be looking at condition scoring these cows over the next few days and taking that action to give yourself that time and give the cow time to build up that condition. Stephen, from the perspective of minerals, that, you know, there's lots of conversation around, you know, the appropriate minerals for breeding, and there are some particular nuts that the various co-ops would recommend at this time. Is there anything in particular that farmers should be including in their concentrate mix, or the minerals that they're putting through the water, you know, in the coming weeks, to make sure that they're at optimum in cows at mating start date?
Yeah, so there are probably three main minerals that we would focus on it from a breeding perspective, and they would be copper, selenium, and iodine. And we know that if in grass in Ireland, that all of these minerals are naturally deficient, and are not, there is not enough concentration of these minerals in grass to supply the requirements for lactating cows. And that is the reason that we would that minerals are supplemented, whether it be in concentrates, through the water, or through boluses. So I think, you know, really one aspect is to know, one important aspect though is to know what is the situation on your farm, and the best way to identify that is either through a grass mineral analysis, or by identifying some cows in the herd, collecting some blood from them, and getting it tested to get an idea of the overall herd mineral status.
And then if we focus our attention, Stephen, to heifers, and, you know, I suppose good submission rate and conception rate in the replacement heifers can have a huge impact and a benefit in terms of overall fertility in the herd. A lot of farmers now are looking to tighten the number of days it takes to service all heifers, in terms of using maybe a synchronization protocol and get that first service in. Can you give us a recommendation of a synchronization protocol that is appropriate for heifers?
So, I mean, the heifers are obviously the highest EBI animals in the herd, and they should be targeted for breeding dairy replacements from using high EBI sires. They are also the most fertile animals in the herd, and they generating the majority of the replacements from the heifers is a key step towards maximizing the rate of genetic gain in the herd. In terms of the synchronization protocols that are available for heifers, there are a couple of options. Some farmers would prefer to breed off of natural heats for maybe first week after first week of the breeding season, and then any heifers that have not been inseminated during the first week of the breeding season can be administered an injection of prostaglandin, and this will bring heifers that are cycling into heat within 2 to 5 days for AI. Now, when relying on this approach, as I mentioned, the heifers must be cycling, and it still does require heat detection with this protocol. Any of the heifers then that did not come into heat after the first 10 days of the breeding season, there would be maybe less than 10% of them will require a second injection of prostaglandin 11 days after the first injection of prostaglandin. And with this approach, that the vast majority of heifers will be bred during the first 10 days, and all of the heifers, assuming that they're all cycling, should be bred within the first 3 weeks. I guess the other option then that is becoming more commonly used is to set the heifers up on a timed AI protocol. And the advantage of this is that no heat detection is required. However, it does involve the labor involved in implementing the protocol is greater than some other approaches. But basically it's an 8-day protocol for heifers that involves the insertion of a progesterone device 8 days before mating start date, and an injection of GnRH. And then 3 days before AI and 2 days before AI, each heifer needs to get 2 injections of prostaglandin. And then 2 days before AI, the progesterone device needs to be removed. And then on the day of AI, the heifers should be in heat and they are inseminated. And when they're inseminated, they should also get another injection of GnRH. So those would be the 2 main options for synchronizing heifers, Emma-Louise.
And essentially, I guess what you're doing there, as you say, the first option, you're breeding to natural heat for a week, and then you're going in with your synchronization protocol in order to capture any of the heifers that haven't been reached. With the fixed time AI, a lot of the work is done ahead of mating start date, and then what you're essentially doing is you're inseminating them all on the one day. Can you make a comment, Stephen, on the cost of those 2 synchronization protocols? And also, I suppose, is there any difference in conception rates across the 2 protocols?
Yeah, in terms of cost, Emma-Louise, the prostaglandin option, which was the first protocol, is going to be a cheaper option. Each shot of prostaglandin is going to be a few euro. I guess at the other end of that then is the timed AI protocol, which is going to cost anywhere from probably 30, 35 to 40 euro. Usually depends on the number of animals that are going to be enrolled. In terms of the conception rates, with heifers, with conventional semen, we're looking at conception rates of 70%, and with sex semen, we're looking at conception rates in heifers of about 60%.
And then if we think about looking at the actual breeding season, and once we start serving cows, I guess there's a little bit of conversation in recent times, and there has been the introduction of the sex semen conversation, and that might confuse people a little bit as to the optimum time to serve cows. So if you could give us a comment, Stephen, on an optimal time to inseminate cows once you have observed them in heat, and maybe, taking into consideration there may be some farms that are inseminating once a day and some twice a day.
Yeah, well, when cows are in heat, they on average they're in heat for about 9 hours. However, we know that about 55% of cows will actually be in heat for 8 hours or less. And, that kind of feeds into our recommendation for heat checking cows at least 3 times per day during the breeding season. In terms of the optimal time to AI, I think when conventional semen is being used, we're talking about 8 to 12 hours from the onset of the starting heat. We do know from that when sex semen is being used, however, that the insemination needs to occur closer to the time of ovulation. And the recommendation when sex semen is being used is to AI 14 to 20 hours after the onset of the standing heat. In terms of farms that are, either using once a day AI or twice a day AI, and want to use some sex semen, I guess twice a day option does give more flexibility, okay, in terms of identifying when the cows have started to come in heat, and then identifying when is the best time. So cows that have come into heat the evening before, they would be suitable for a sex semen straw that morning, the following morning. But however, if once a day AI is practiced, then those cows should really get a conventional straw. If the twice a day AI is used and a cow is coming to heat that morning, then the AI with sex semen can be done during the evening time. So for sure, there is a bit more flexibility on the use of sex semen when twice a day AI is being used.
And I think, Stephen, we've had a good conversation now in relation to, I guess, what's exactly what exactly is happening and maybe should happen on farms in the coming weeks. But if we take, I guess, a different slant on fertility performance in the herd, there's evidence throughout the conversation we've had that management of cows at this time of year has a huge impact on fertility performance and hitting the submission rate and the conception rate that we've spoken about. But outside of this management, how important is genetics, and how important does, the fertility that you have bred into cows, how important a factor is that in terms of, cows getting, returning, getting back in calf?
Yes, so we know from lots of work that we've done here in Moore Park that a high fertility subindex is a key driver of high reproductive performance. And we can see that nationally as well, with the increasing subindex in the national herd, for fertility subindex in the national herd, and the improvements in fertility that have been seen, that we know from the national herd data. From the work that we have done, we know that cows with a high fertility subindex, they have higher body condition score at calving, and they maintain that body condition score right up until breeding and throughout lactation. Cows with a high fertility subindex, they also they have less endometritis. They start cycling earlier. When they're in heat, they show stronger heats. And in terms of conception rates, they have higher conception rates. So, the fertility subindex is a key driver towards improving herd reproductive performance. And in terms of, bull selection ahead of the breeding season, the recommendation is for the fertility subindex is to have a team average of €120, and all bulls should be have a fertility subindex greater than €80.
And I think it's a really interesting point you make, Stephen, that you've observed it in the research environment, but now there's very strong evidence to support that, across dairy farms in Ireland. I think this has been a really insightful conversation, and it has focused our minds as to the direction we're heading and what we need to be doing over the next number of weeks in terms of, looking at body condition score in cows and reacting to that, and putting in some effort in the pre-breeding heat detection, in combination with other things like the metri-check and the pre-breeding scan, to make sure that cows are ready and cycling ahead of mating start date, to optimise the 3-week submission rate and our conception rate to first service. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Stephen Moore for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.